There are several ways we can add materials to our objects, and I will show you them now. You might find that one suits your needs better than others. I'm going to use this cube here to demonstrate some of the different methods, and then I'll look at a more complicated model just to show you some of the pitfalls that you might encounter. The first method is the most straightforward. To add a material, we choose this button here on the right, and I'll expand this window just a touch so we can see a little better what we're doing. If I change the colour here, that will give my shape a particular colour. Of course we can't see it at the moment because we're in solid mode. To see any textures or materials that we place on the object, we must look at the viewport shading mode here called Look Dev or Material Preview, and you can see now it's got the colour on it. Alternatively, you can use the rendered view, which gives it more realistic colouring and lighting, but it does make the computer work harder. So I suggest that you work in this view here, the Look Dev. With this basic material, we can add colour, and we can change any of these settings to change the look of our object. So for example, we can make it look more metallic by turning up metallic, and you'll see that as we do that, this cube becomes more shiny, more metallic, and in fact it would reflect the environment and other objects around it. Have a play with some of these settings. They will all do different things. Emission here, if you want something to act like a light, we can turn that up, and you can see that that will glow with a particular light if I look at it in rendered view. And if I change the colour here in the emission, it will always override whatever's in the colour here. If I want to ignore this, then I have to set it to black. So have a play with some of these settings, see what they do, and see if that works for you. Chances are though you'll want a more complicated material on your object. So the next option is actually to select particular faces to be a particular material. For example, I might want this face here to be a different colour to the rest of the object. To do this, we must go into edit mode. So I've pressed tab, you can also choose it from the menu here, and then face select. As an example, I'll choose this face here, and I come over to the materials panel, and here at the top it's a good idea to name your materials. I'll just call this one red, and if I press the plus button, I can make a brand new material, and just for the sake of simplicity I will make this blue. And if I want it to appear on a particular face, I select the material from this list here. You can have lots of different materials if you want to, and then press assign. And you can see now, if I go into object mode, that that single face is blue. There we are. If you've got lots of faces on your object, for example, you have added a subdivision surface modifier, like so, and then applied it, we can now go into edit mode and we've got lots more faces that we can play with. So for example, I could choose these here, like that, and go to my materials, add a new material, and assign it. Obviously name it as well. So you can see how we might be able to make clothing and skin using this method. It is limited because obviously you need faces to make that colour. You can't have a face that is half one colour, half another. So if we wanted to put eyes and mouth on this using the same method, we would have to have more faces, which would mean going to subdivision surface again and turning that up. Obviously you've got to be careful how many faces you add, because this will add to the work the computer has to do to display our object. But now if I apply that, you can see that I could select some faces. I'm just holding down the shift key, and this isn't remotely even, but now if I press C, I could perhaps There we are, just paint a selection like that. And now if I go to the materials, press enter. There we are, go to the materials, add a new one. I'll just make this one black, or very dark at least, and assign it. And there we go. So this is a perfectly acceptable method of adding a material to your object and giving it a material or a texture that describes, you know, its different details. This would be pretty good for, say, cartoon characters, that sort of thing, things that look cartoonish or perhaps pixelated. As you can see, you know, you are limited to a fairly simple design here. So there are other methods that we can use that will add more detail. The next method that we can look at is painting on the textures by hand. To begin with, I'm just going to remove these textures here and sort of start afresh. To do that, I click on one and I press the minus button to remove it from that object, and you can see I'm just left with the sphere here. To texture paint an object, the easiest method is to click it in object mode and then across the top here choose texture paint. Again, we'll only be able to see the results of this if we are in look dev mode or rendered. At first, there are no textures on the object, which is where we get this delightful purple colour from. That indicates that there are no textures or materials on this object. Over here on the right, you'll see that we can actually add and edit the materials that are on this object. Here, first, we choose the plus button next to no textures. And in this instance, and in most instances, for just basic colouring and things like that, we're going to use base colour. I tend to turn mine to black, and here we can see it's HD. So it depends on your game. You may want to put this up to 2048, which is 2K. Set to black, just in this box here, and then press OK. You'll see that the object turns black, and we can now select colours and paint on it. As you can see, this allows us to be a lot more detailed with our painting, and you can see that we can paint some faces half one colour, half another. So this is a really good method for getting more sort of natural or realistic looks to your characters or objects. Sometimes, particularly with complicated objects, the painting won't work so well, and this is due to something called the UV layout. The UV layout is a kind of net of all of these faces all flattened out, and you can see it over here if you choose material base colour from this list, and we go into edit mode and select all of those faces. You can see over here all the faces flattened out to make that sphere, and we can actually paint on the sphere, or we can paint over here as well. Sometimes, however, it's not that neat and you get overlapping faces. I'll just try and recreate that particular scenario. I'm going to choose UV and project from view. You'll see that this is now changed, and that actually, if we look carefully at this, I'll get a new colour. So I'll go back to texture paint mode, get myself a different colour, and I'm just going to draw a red dot right here. And you can see that that's appeared there. It's appeared there as we'd expect. However, it's also appeared on the back, and that's because whilst it appears to be the sphere here, it's actually all of these faces that we can see, and all of the ones behind it, you know, overlapped on each other. So we've got the front of the sphere here, but we've also got the back. And so that creates a problem that we're painting in one place, but it's actually painting in multiple places. You might even see more extreme versions of this where you're painting in one place and the paint appears in a totally different place. To fix this, we need to change these UVs so that they're all flattened out and each one can be painted uniquely. So if you're having this sort of problem, go into edit mode, press A to select all the faces of your object, and choose UV and choose Smart UV Project. Press OK. And you can see all the faces here have been laid out flat and separated from each other so that we don't get, if I go back into texture paint mode, we don't get those strange results. We paint on the surface and it doesn't appear anywhere other than where we want it. Now, mine is obviously a random mess, but you could, oh, there's a face there. You could obviously spend your time painting and getting all the details right. To give you a bit more freedom when you paint, as well as colour, you've got radius, so you can paint more faces at once. Just be aware that this can be a bit slower if you're trying to paint lots of faces. And also you have the strength, which is kind of like opacity in Photoshop. If you turn it down, I'll choose a green, and you'll see that when I paint now, it paints over the red and sort of mixes the two together. And the more I now paint the green, you can see it becomes more intense in areas where I've painted more. Of course, if I turn the strength all the way up, it is fully opaque and doesn't do any mixing straight away. So you can use this to create careful blends between colour, which can really add to the realism. Obviously you can take more time painting than I have, so you can really get some nice detail in there. Once you're done, it's really important that you come over here where you've got image. You'll see there's a little asterisk next to the word image. This is because this picture hasn't currently been saved, and it needs to be. If we close this Blender file without saving it, it may well disappear, and we come back and we can see that purple object again to see that it's got, to show that it's got no materials. So it's really important that we choose image and then just press save all images. If you're doing this for more than one object, I do recommend that you change the name from material base color to something more appropriate. And of course save your Blender file every so often as well. Another problem you might encounter using this method is that you begin to paint and there's nothing comes out. It doesn't appear to do anything. Sometimes here in the texture rollout, this checkerboard pattern might well be a different color, like that, for example. So I've just made a new texture, but that texture is just black, which in Blender language, I suppose, it means this is nothing, you know. So if I paint, no matter what color I choose, nothing happens. So it's important that if you want to use the color wheel and paint directly on the object, if it's not working for you, just check this texture area and make sure, if needs be, that you remove the texture from it so you can just see the checkerboard pattern. Then you should be able to paint as normal. And of course, save your images. So colouring in is great, and assigning materials to the faces it works very well in some instances, but sometimes we want a bit more realism, and for that we need to use images that we've either created elsewhere or found somewhere. I'm going to take off the materials here so that I can better demonstrate this process. I'm also just going to pop back into layout mode so we can see a little more of what's going on. So to use pictures, first, get the pictures that you need. You could also draw these pictures in Photoshop or something similar and add them to it in the same way to give this object the look of, say, wood or metal or grass or mud or whatever it is. We begin in the same way as we do when we add another material. Press New, and here instead of base color, you'll notice a little dot at the end. If we press that, we can actually choose Image Texture from this list. This will allow us to open an image. I'm going to press open and find a picture that I've already got saved and open that image, and you'll see now it has wrapped that image around this sphere. It might not always turn out as well as this, in which case you can come down here to the vector settings where you can alter the texture coordinates. You can just kind of go through and try them out, and some might have desirable results and others might not. Ooh. There we go, that's the UV. Sometimes it might be necessary to unwrap the UVs again just to make this texture fit properly. To do that, we go into edit mode by choosing it from the menu here or pressing tab, and we choose those faces, and I'm going to press UV, try out some of these other methods. They might change it, they might not, they might change it for the better, they might change it for the worse. Let's try this, and if we have a little look at that, yeah, that looks okay. It may be necessary to change this particular setting, whether it is projected flat or as a box or as a sphere. Let's try sphere. Ooh. And again, you're getting different results. Just have a little explore and go with the one that works best for you. If it doesn't work out exactly right, don't worry too much. In the same way that we could assign different materials to different faces, we can do the same with this. It will probably look a little unnatural, but if I press C and just brush select a few faces here, I can then go to the material settings, I can add a new material, and again choose an image texture. Okay, again, it's probably a good idea to name these. And then I go into edit mode, I choose some faces, and I should be able to click assign. And there we go. Obviously you can see that this is quite jagged around the edge, but it might be useful in some cases, particularly for sort of, man-made things, cupboards and things like that, or computers, that kind of thing, where you can actually have defined areas that suit the kind of rectangular shapes that we're making it out of. For more natural things like this, it doesn't work quite so well, which brings me on to the next method, which is really the same as the texture painting, but this time we're using these images to paint instead of colour. In order to show you this properly, I will remove these and start afresh. Here's my object. So the first thing I'm going to do is go into texture paint mode. You can see that it currently has no textures because we've got this purple colour or magenta. So we need to add a texture. To do that, we're going to go over to settings, and here in no textures, press plus, choose base color, give it a name, and press OK. I've chosen the basic color as black. Now normally we would paint by choosing colors here, but in this case we're going to be painting by using textures here. To bring textures in, we need to use this tab, this little one that looks like a chessboard. Clicking on that, I'm going to press new, and I'm going to call this sand, because it will be sand, and then I'm going to press open, and now I've selected my sand image. Here's a little preview of it. It's probably worthwhile at this point bringing in several images so you don't have to keep loading them in. So if you know you're going to use sand and rock and water, bring them all in first. To do that, we can just click the X here, remove that from view. It's still there. We can get to our sand if we choose this menu, but now this allows us to add another image in. So new, exactly the same process. Press open to select the file, and then we've got some water, and I'll name it as well. Once we've brought in all of the things we're going to paint with, we need to go back to our settings here, where if we scroll down and look at the texture section, if you need to pop it open, just do that. And if you click on this square, you can see our different brushes in there. So however many you've loaded in will all be there. So first, if I choose sand, I can click and drag and paint that sand on like so. I could then swap to water and paint that on. So you can see that this gives a much more natural and realistic look to our object. You can still see all the faces on it. I should probably smooth it out, but to do that, just go into object mode and choose object, shade smooth. That should help it just look a little better. So you can paint with lots of different brushes to really make a detailed environment. This might be good for sort of skin textures or scales, that sort of thing on animals, and as you can see as well with different types of landscape. I'll just pop back to texture paint mode so that I can show you the radius and the strength. The radius will control how much or how big an area you'll paint at a given time, and the strength is how opaque your brush will be. So one is fully opaque, you can't see through it, and it doesn't blend the materials. But if I turn it down, you can see that it's actually a lot weaker, a lot more transparent. But I can paint over the same spot several times to make it more opaque. But this is a really good method for blending images. So if I now choose my sand, you'll see that I can kind of create blends between the two, which again just lend it a more natural appearance. And of course, if I don't want to spend all my time doing that, and once I get to a point where it can be more opaque, I can just turn it up. So now instead of that hard contrast here, we're getting a much softer blend between the two materials. Once you're done painting like this, if you go to Image and just choose Save All Images, that'll be there when you open Blender next. And if this painting isn't working out for you, you're painting in one place and it's appearing in another, just refer to an earlier point in the tutorial where I'm talking about texture painting and some of the problems that you might have, and they apply to this method as well. So now you've got a small selection of methods to give your objects and characters some materials to make them look, a bit more interesting. Give them a go, see which one works for you, and have some fun with it.